You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns.
Welcome to Chakras and Shotguns, the podcast that guides you on a journey of spiritual development and personal preparedness. I'm Mik, a marketer, energy healer, and prepper.
And I'm Jenn, a former lawyer, now yoga instructor, and tarot and human design reader. Mushrooms. For the longest, we just thought about them as food. Studies have shown that some may even treat Alzheimer's and cancer. But what about magic mushrooms? Today, we're getting psychedelic and exploring the spirituality of the mystical little fungi.
Before we get into that, have you become a patron yet? You can find out more information in the show description. And keep listening to this episode to hear about our energy clearing rituals that we had with the Quiro, a remote indigenous tribe in Peru. All right, let's get into some breath work as we always do to put us into a mindful space.
Okay, so the inspiration for today's breath work was a TikTok that I saw. I'll post the creator in the show description, but he made a really good point about how in affirmations we'll say, I am, and I am safe, or I am abundant, or I'm healthy. And that language is really language just around the root chakra, and you're not traveling through the crown. So today we picked peace. And so we're going to do our breath work today with a little bit of affirmations, but we're going to work through the rooter to the tuta, or the root chakra to the crown chakra. Okay? So find a comfortable seat or lie down and put one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart, and just connect to yourself and your breath and your body in this moment. Starting to tune in to your inhales and your exhales. Allowing yourself to fully release and drop into this moment. Exhale all of the air out of your body. Take a big inhale in through your nose, expanding and inflating your belly, filling yourself up completely with air. And sigh that breath out through your mouth. Maybe stick out your tongue, unhinge your jaw. Just letting go of any lingering tension. Let's do another together. Inhale in through your nose. Hold at the top. And exhale that breath back out through your mouth. Last one together. Inhale in through your nose. Your biggest breath yet. Hold at the top. And this time, seal your lips and exhale that breath back out through your nose. Allow yourself to breathe normally. Maybe deepen your inhales and your exhales, trying to make them an equal length to each other. When we take deep breaths, we're telling our nervous system that we're safe, and it takes us out of that fight or flight mode, that constant anxiety that we may experience from day to day. And as we start going through these affirmations, feel free to say each one out loud. And the space that we provide in between, I want you to really feel that statement. And maybe even practice feeling that statement at each chakra. So starting with the root chakra, the base of your spine. I am at peace. Moving up to your sacral chakra, which is around your sex organs, I feel peaceful. Moving up to your solar plexus, so at the top of your rib cage, I act peaceful. Moving up to your heart space, directly in the center of your chest, to the right of your physical heart, I love peace. Moving up to your throat, I speak peacefully. Moving to your third eye, I see peace around me. And finally, your crown. I am connected to peace, and I know peace. Slowly start to come back into the room. If your eyes were closed, maybe soften your gaze. And maybe even pause the episode and take some time to journal how that made you feel, any sensations that you felt, any colors. And let's get back to the show.
Peace be unto you. Thanks for that breathwork, Jen. Let's get into our main topic, magic mushrooms, or as my friends who use a lot of drugs say, let's talk about them shrooms. Mushrooms are actually legal in 4 countries. Jamaica.
What, Guan? Isn't that what they say? Did I say it right? Somebody go eat me up.
We're going to get a hate mail on that one. The Netherlands. You got something for them too?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I don't know any Dutch.
Brazil and Nepal. And basically those are really like legal loopholes. It's not like on the books that they're legal. It's just like they haven't banned them.
Right.
Jamaica in particular is interesting because recently it has become a mushroom hub. There's tons of Westerners flocking there to stay at these high-end mushroom retreats where they charge $6,000 per person.
6 G's.
Yeah, we got to raise our prices. In the US in particular, we're not going to see like magic mushroom dispensaries, but there are a couple of things to note. Colorado recently made mushrooms legal for people 21 plus if you're at a licensed healing center. Some places also have decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms. Those include Oregon, Washington, D.C., Ann Arbor, Michigan, Seattle, Washington, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Oakland and Santa Cruz in the state of California.
Yeah, and the really crucial thing about legality is your ability to sell it in that country and grow it as well. And Jamaica they were like, oh, everybody want mushrooms? Okay, we're about to clear out this land and we about to cultivate these mushrooms. So they have like the biggest like organized mushroom growing operation. And I think they were the first country to like legally ship it I think they sold it to Canada for like medical research. So yeah, Jamaica was like,
yeah, let's do that.
Let's get on that green money. So yeah, like Mik said, magic mushrooms pretty much around the globe are illegal. But that doesn't mean that people aren't using it. Like the brand for mushrooms, I think for a very long time has been like a hippie party drug, like something you would take at Coachella, Burning Man, like at music festivals. And people are like, let's just see what we feel, you know? There's actually a very long history of spiritual use of mushrooms, which we're going to get into in this episode. But let's get into the science. What makes magic mushrooms magical? Well, they contain hallucinogens, mainly the compound psilocybin. But psilocybin is not actually what gets you high. It's a prodrug, so it needs to interact with something else for it to have the effects. So once you ingest mushrooms and they start cooking in your digestive system and they get to your intestines, the intestines turn the psilocybin into psilocin, and that is what makes you trip. So while taking psychedelic mushrooms, and we'll get more into what you may experience in detail, but you may see colors, auras, visions, receive messages. We're also going to get into our own personal experiences later as well.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the history and how long mushrooms have been used as a psychedelic. There is one entertaining theory out there that psychedelic mushrooms evolved the Homo erectus species into what we are today, which are Homo sapiens. Looking at our evolution, there was this one particular scientist, his name is Terence McKenna, and he felt that our cognitive development hit a supersonic point and basically was happening way too fast. So his theory is that primates were walking around and they decided to pick up some magic mushrooms and added it to their diet. And that basically caused them to trip. And they expanded their consciousness, evolving their mind, which pushed us forward into Homo sapien. Now, this theory that he has is called the stoned ape theory. Of course, this theory is controversial and scientists have pretty much dismissed it as speculative. But there are also variations on this theory, with some pointing to ayahuasca as potentially being the key drug instead of mushrooms. Or if you remember from our last episode, the Cherokee believed that cannabis was here and was a plant that helped to expand our consciousness. Maybe it was a combination of all three.
I kind of love this theory. It was like I heard it for the first time and I was like, cool. Yep. I believe that. It's true now. Just because, why not? I like food history. I don't look into it much, but I just like think about it a lot. Like, who figured out that this mushroom's poisonous, or who unfortunately figured out that this mushroom's poisonous, or like if I put eggs with flour and a little milk and maybe something else that I can make a cake, like who figured that out? Like, and then was that divine? Were they high? Like, who decided to put that together? Like, nobody in their right mind would like put that shit together. So
what's interesting, going back to the conversation about ayahuasca, right? And I've listened to a lot of episodes of Kara's podcast, and she talks about how Aya in particular, and even Combo the frogs, the spirits of those medicines spoke to people. And back then we had a much deeper connection spiritually with the earth. And so it wasn't like, oh, we were just like experimenting like we do now. Science is all about like experimenting, hypotheses. Oh, you ate this, you died. I'm not gonna eat that. That's how we kind of think of maybe someone back then doing it. But in reality, it was divine guidance that led them to understand which plants would have certain effects.
Yeah. Interesting. Some documented depictions of psychedelic mushrooms include Stone Age rock art in Africa and Europe. Some of it going back to 9,000 to 7,000 BC, so a long-ass time ago. And then before Christopher Columbus brought his dusty self to the Americas, there was evidence that psychedelic mushrooms were used in what is today's North, Central, and South America as part of religious ceremonies for like indigenous peoples. The Aztecs and the Mazateks referred to psilocybin mushrooms as genius mushrooms, divinatory mushrooms, and wondrous mushrooms when their languages were translated into English. And the Mayans used psilocybin to communicate with deities and gain spiritual insights.
So yeah, for a long time, mushrooms pretty much remained an indigenous spiritual practice. But that did change. There was a mention, the actual first mention of magic mushrooms that came in a Western medical journal was in 1799. There was a London family who accidentally ate some magic mushrooms for breakfast. Maybe they put it in their omelet or something, thought it was some regular lion's mane or something. I don't know. And what happened, they got treated and the youngest child kept breaking out into laughter and the parents couldn't get him to stop. They actually had to threaten him in order to get him to stop laughing.
Yeah, this was before gentle parenting. So it's mentioned there, but then it's kind of quiet. Fast forward to 1955, there was a European couple, the Wassons, who were the first documented Westerners to partake in an indigenous mushroom ceremony. And then, baby, they did that and they were like, we're going to go and tell it on the mountain. They told everybody. There was even an article about it in Life magazine. Then, Westerners going Western. We had to get a scientific name for the mushroom. They started studying the compounds in the magic mushrooms. And so that was going on around 1958. But this Life article and like the beginning studies of psilocybin, of just like, what is it, was big because it inspired Timothy Leary to go to Mexico to check out magic mushrooms for himself. So he was a professor at Harvard. He's like, bet I'm there. So he packs his bags. He goes to Mexico. He comes back to Harvard. He partners up with Richard Alpert, another professor, and they start the Harvard Psilocybin Project. They wanted to promote psychological and religious studies of psilocybin and other psychedelic drugs, so LSD, etc. Alpert and Leary, they wanted to conduct research, and they did, with psilocybin on incarcerated people in the 1960s. They wanted to test whether psilocybin could have an effect on recidivism. So recidivism in the criminal justice system is basically like, once you get out of prison, are you going to go back? So they did the study. They gave the incarcerated people psilocybin, and then they checked up with them 6 months later. And what they were expecting was like blown out of the water. Like the number that they thought was going to be of people going back was like less by like 40% or something like that. So this was like huge that a psychedelic could actually have a real effect on rehabilitating and reforming people who had previously committed a crime.
So yeah, these guys were definitely feeling themselves. They decided to go ahead and do another study, this time with graduate divinity school students. They wanted to see if psilocybin could create a deep and profound religious state. And so there were 10 students that participated, and all 10 reported that they had some sort of deep religious experience when they were tripping on magic mushrooms. Now, fast forward to 1963. It's only been 3 years since these two guys started these studies. Harvard is like, yo, y'all are wilding. Y'all got to go. They get kicked out. When they looked at kind of what was happening in some of these studies, they essentially Harvard decided that they weren't really academically sound. How they were recruiting some of their participants, they just weren't really following all the protocols. And then on top of that, these two cats, Leary and Alpert, they were actually doing psilocybin with the subjects during some of the studies. Their justification was that they needed to kind of be in the same state of mind to really see what was going on. But, it's a little controversial when you're talking about the scientific method. It's, definitely something that shamans will do, but not really something you see in academia.
Yeah. One point, the prison study was academically sound. So they started off good.
Okay.
And then they kind of fell off from there. Yeah. So they're out at Harvard. They don't have a home, but they're true believers in psychedelics. Like this really opened their eyes, and they basically become like psychedelic evangelists. No affiliation with Jesus. They turn to the counterculture, which we talked about in the cannabis episode. That was last episode 80. And they were big. Like they were a big deal. They're doing like talks at like festivals and gatherings, and Timothy Leary's catchphrase, turn on, tune in, and drop out, was huge back then. And you can like just imagine what the establishment thinks about this. Turn on. Like, what the fuck y'all turning on? And what you're dropping out of? And what's going on? You dropping out of society? You don't want to be a part of society anymore, which means you might not pay taxes anymore. And then how am I going to get my money? And then
how am I going to get you to fight this war?
How am I going to get you to fight this war? If you're turning on and you're tuning into like these deep, profound religious experiences and connecting outside of yourself and peace and love and light, how can I convince you to go pew pew to some people that you don't even know?
Mm-hmm.
Richard Alpert, he ends up running a commune somewhere like on the East Coast. I think it was Pennsylvania, maybe upstate New York. And he's inviting people to come and experience psychedelics. And it's kind of like this healing retreat center. Novel back then, somewhat. Not very novel now. And then presumably he gets a download or something during one of these trips. He goes to India in 1967. So like in a period of 7 years, this man like goes from like probably a pretty square Harvard professor to a hippie on drugs running a commune. And then he goes to India and studies under this Hindu guru who renames him Ram Das, which translates into servant of Ram, the Hindu god Ram. Or I think like they kind of whitewashed it for the masses when he came back and they made it servant of God.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard of Ram Dass, you know he was a very big deal. If you haven't, he pretty much became the Western ambassador, so to speak, of like bringing yoga into mainstream Western culture. Like he was the, how do I put this, familiar face for yoga and Eastern medicine and philosophy. And so, yeah, he gets a lot of credit for like how there's a yoga studio on every corner now. Like he was a part of that.
Yeah. He's written a ton of books, so go check him out. His story is super interesting. I actually watched a documentary on Netflix that came out a couple years ago. It's called Ram Dass Going Home. And it basically follows him. He's in his 80s. He had a stroke and he's basically like living out the end of his life in Maui. And he has some folks like that are, I guess, kind of described as like his protege, disciples kind of vibe. And they're like assisting him. But there's a lot of wisdom that he conveys. And there was one quote in particular that I wanted to bookmark and share here on this episode because he does reference mushrooms. So the quote is, "My life has been a dance between power and love. The first part until Harvard, power, 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 power. Up until drugs, I thought power was the end all and be all because I was a little individual. Then drugs and on, love, 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 love. My first mushroom trip, it was so profound that I saw that radiance was inside and I said, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. My life was from rolls to soul."
That's beautiful. I think we talked about the roles that we play on the ego episode, about how we can get so caught up in like our identity being where I work, where I live, what I wear, who I am. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a wife, et cetera, et cetera. So again, like coming out of himself and getting to the soul part, which is so much deeper and in some ways so much simpler. So yeah, that's Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, or Ram Dass. They did these huge studies on psilocybin at Harvard. And by 1967, like Richard Alpert is now Ram Dass. He got his own thing going on. They have firmly found their roles in counterculture. Fast forward to 1970, and actually we keep saying fast forward, but it's really just been 10 years. Like Timothy Leary got back from Mexico in 1960. And now it's 1970. Richard Nixon has declared Timothy Leary is the most dangerous man in America. Okay. We get the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, which we talked about in the last episode as well. And that made psilocybin a Schedule I drug, federally illegal, nonstop. And all of a sudden, this magical drug that people wanted to research, and it was very cutting edge to even start looking into it and the benefits of it, all of a sudden now it's illegal. And it really makes you wonder, if we hadn't freaked out as a culture. I don't know why I'm saying we. This was well before my time. But if we hadn't freaked out as a culture and we continued researching the potential effects of mushrooms, like where could we be? What could our prison system look like? What could those protocols look like? Could that have been an option to give incarcerated people psilocybin to lower recidivism rates? But we got so caught up in capitalism and compliance and authoritarianism that we really kind of cut ourselves off at the knees out of fear when the Controlled Substances Act comes into play.
So pretty much from 1970 to 2006, 36 years, there's no progress, nothing that's built on the work that the Harvard researchers did. We're just kind of on pause when it comes to psilocybin research.
Yeah, and I even really couldn't find anything globally, any type of research during that period. It felt like the world was just like, mushrooms. We're not going to talk about it.
Fast forward to now, though, clinical trials show lots of promising benefits, particularly on things like depression, cluster headaches, anxiety, existential crises, PTSD, OCD, mood and substance disorders. It can also help people stop smoking and drinking. There are a lot of studies looking into integrating psilocybin into talk therapy. It can also increase brain connectivity and neuroplasticity in the brain, which is excellent for brain health and how we kind of adapt to outside stimuli.
Yeah, it's our ability to take in new information. It's like basically like if your brain is an old dog, like teaching it new tricks. Like, wow. Which is amazing. When I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like the implications of this are amazing. But shamans and healers were telling you that this was profound, getting people to very deep spiritual states, getting answers, healing them from the inside out. And it was like, okay, well, we didn't have the technological language to describe neuroplasticity, but that doesn't negate shamans and healers and what they've been doing for centuries, right? So they knew all along, but I had to check my Western culture lens of being like, oh, wow, mushrooms are really cool. And it's like, well, before you read that, you thought mushrooms were really cool. Like you didn't need to know that, right? So with all of this research, even though psilocybin is still a Schedule I drug, you can go on Johns Hopkins website. They have a whole page on their psilocybin research, right? And they're like, oh, psilocybin is so great. And we're going to be using it for this and that and this and that. But it's still illegal. And Schedule I drugs, just to remind you of the definition, it means that it's a drug with no currently accepted medical use, false, and a high potential for abuse. Also false, because it's actually really hard to get addicted and to overdose on psilocybin. So like the math ain't mathin'. Like that list is looking real whack. It's looking very hateration. Like it's a lot of haterade on the Schedule I list. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes.
All right. So you heard the history and the potential benefits of mushrooms, and maybe you haven't tried them and you want to see if that's for you. Here are just a few tips from us to consider. First of all, how much should you take? There is a great article on the website Leafly that we'll put in the show notes, and they basically go over the dosages. Starting first with like a low dose, that's around 1 gram. With that dose, you're maybe getting to like a little bit of euphoria. Your senses are enhanced. Then from there, a medium dose would be around 1.75 grams. At that dosage, you may experience perceptual distortions and higher or even heavy euphoria. After that, you're starting to go into high dose territory. That's anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 grams. This qualifies as a full psychedelic experience. You may stop perceiving yourself as yourself, right? You get into that dissolution of the ego and the interconnectivity with everything that exists. And you're fully tripping. You're on that ride. So yeah, you riding that thing out. Anything higher than that, you on that ultralight beam. You know what I'm saying? The ultra high dose. And that is, from a dosage standpoint, basically anything 5 grams and beyond. Now, the OGs in the mushroom game who call themselves the psychonauts, they don't even really go that high. That's like danger zone. You wilding if you're up there. So I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. And all of that being said, it is also quite tricky to even still pin down the dosage. Magic mushrooms are not like a cannabis, a THC edible, which is like, oh, okay, this is 5 milligrams. Then it's very inconsistent how much psilocybin is in each mushroom. So that can be kind of tricky too. So yeah, I think that's a good segue to like getting into some of the other tips. Setting is extremely important. You want to be in a clean environment, somewhere you feel safe and where you have easy access to a bathroom, just in case you purge, there is a potential for that. You want to think about music or lighting that would help you relax. This is not the time to listen to Nuck If You Buck. You might not want to listen to really sad songs. I used to love sad songs, but that's not the vibe.
Yeah. So I can't even stress this enough how important setting is. It's really like the key ingredient that will lead you on to a potential bad trip. Like if you're not in a great physical setting that makes you feel safe and like cozy, that can lead to what's considered a quote unquote bad trip.
Again, go low and go slow. That was our advice with cannabis and edibles. Same thing applies here. You may want to fast and I'm not switching up the speeds. I mean, you may want to not eat. And the reason for that is, remember, what creates the tripping effect is you actually processing the psilocybin in your system. So if you just had a big meal, your body is busy. So it's trying to digest that quarter pounder. So you need to try and do it on an empty stomach if you can. And that will increase the speed in which you feel the effects and like how deep your experience ends up being. It could end up being a dud if you've had like a really big meal. Drinking something citrusy like lemonade, that can also help the psilocybin become psilocin. Mushrooms may take a while to kick in. And remember, there's a lot of factors. How much did you eat, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to be patient because you don't want to rush and eat too much, ingest too much, and then you end up taking way more than you intended. And then, baby, basically you stuck. And you're not going to be stuck forever, but you're just going to have to sit there and you're just going to have to let it play out. If you're planning on taking anything that's a medium dosage and up, or if it's your first time, baby, get a chaperone. Go to Colorado, find you a healing center, get you somebody to supervise, because you just don't want to. Safety is key, not only like feeling safe, but being safe. So this isn't something that you want to, we would not advise that you do something that's like a medium plus dosage. And then you're like, I'm going to a rave. Some people may do that. That's their prerogative. We're talking about like spiritual journey, plant medicine journey. Think about it very like ceremonial. Also, of course, with all of this, anytime that you are taking any substance that's going to alter your mind, from alcohol to mushrooms, what we talked about on the podcast, do not do this if you think that you are going to be driving or operating heavy machinery. This is not like, you need to treat this like, if someone found out I was doing this under the influence, would that be a problem?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, particularly around like the party aspects. I think you and I, we've only done lower dosages first, and we've also only done it in like kind of the spiritual context. Right? So I think that's an important point. Like, particularly when you're approaching it from spirituality, like you should set an intention around your mushroom consumption. So maybe you want to say, you want clarity on a specific question, or you just want to experience ease, or you want to express gratitude or feel peace, or maybe you want to get some type of resolution on a tough relationship that you're having, or some big problem that you're trying to solve with like your finances, and you want just more clarity around that to come in, right? Those are all great ways in which you can set an intention and allow the medicine to kind of bring those answers for you.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's really important to have a journal. A lot of times you're not going to remember what's happening. And so even if you have a friend there, your chaperone is journaling for you, like you just start saying what's on your mind and let them write it down for you. It's just good to have some type of written record of all the things that you're observing, what you feel, what you hear, what you see, what you think. And you can come back to that when you're of clear mind and really get some of those solutions and answers. Last thing I'll say is it's really important to be open and not to try to fight with the mushrooms. You really have to like let go and relinquish control. One of the things, in addition to like being in a bad environment, but people who are too tight gripped on control and like their reality a lot of times can induce a bad trip because they're not allowing the flow and the ease of the medicine to kind of work. So you have to kind of go into it knowing that your perception is going to change a little bit. Like there's going to be an altering of your mind and you can't fight it. You got to go in as a willing participant.
I've been receiving lately in general, and then also Mik did an energy healing session on me earlier this week about turning down the noise. And that's really good advice for doing plant medicine journeys, is avoiding the noise. So no TV, no Twitter, no Instagram, TikTok, like the mess. Like if you're trying to resolve your blocks around self-love and confidence, do you need to be watching Love Island? Like, do you need to be watching like fight videos on Twitter? Do you need to be on World Star? Who even goes to World Star anymore? So just being really mindful about what you're taking in as you're ingesting this plant medicine. I tend to meditate and talk with the people or person that I'm with. A lot of times it's me. But yeah, I think mushrooms definitely there's definitely a demand there for mushrooms in a recreational space. But for the way that we're talking about it, this is not something that Mik and I go and do and then we like go frolic at the club. Like it's just that's not how we partake in it. So we're either at a spiritual retreat or we're locked down for the night. All of our official responsibilities in life are done.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about some of our own experiences with psychedelic mushrooms. So I want to talk about my first time taking them, because that's like the interesting piece. Like, you have that first experience, you're like, what the hell is going on?
Ooh, what the hell is going on?
So this was back in Sedona, and I remember taking it. It was a large group of us, and I was the first person that got hit. It activated in my system before everybody else's.
Baby. It hit him with the TKO. It's like pew pew.
And everybody was looking at me like, what is going on with this dude over here? I felt the need to like move a lot. So I was spending a lot of time standing up and kind of like dancing. Then I needed to get low and I would get on the ground. Then at one point I laid down.
Okay, Flow Rider.
I laid down and I put my hood up on my hoodie and I closed my eyes and it was like, whoosh, I got transported. And I found myself like living out this vision in ancient Egypt. And I was in this temple and there were kind of attendants that were around who were kind of managing the temple. They were dealing with like offerings, maybe like flowers and foods and everything. And I was kind of sitting there and I was just admiring the ornate graphics and the decorations on the temple walls. And I was just kind of stuck in that space for a little while. And then when I kind of snapped out of it, I immediately woke up and knew I needed to play the singing bowl. And I was still kind of new to bowls at the time. And I even like held the mallet wrong and there's a video of it and we put on our Patreon of me actually playing it, because there's also like a weird kind of switch in the timeline. It kind of looks like a vortex. I think we talked about it in our vortex episode or one of our time episodes or something like that. So yeah, that happened. And then as like the night kind of continued to progress, I was having all types of visions. I was seeing people's deceased relatives in the room. There was a lot of like spirit activity on the outside of the house that I was observing. And I felt like this real sense of like protection that I wanted to cast around the group. And so I like sat down. I remember like sat on the floor and everyone was kind of in a circle. And I was like pushing out energy to like almost create a protective force field around everyone. Mm-hmm. And I kind of was like standing watch around the edge of the circle and just kind of felt like a sentry almost. Like I was like keeping the space protected and sacred.
Wow, I forgot about all of that.
Yeah, that was all happening.
You were picking up on a lot of like energies and spirits in the space. And
outside the space. Yeah, outside the actual house we were in. Yeah, it was a lot going on.
Yeah. For me on that same trip, my trip was awful. No. And I don't mean like, I didn't have a bad trip. I didn't have a lot of physical effects. Like it wasn't like it hurt my stomach or I threw up or anything like that. But I did not experience anything close to what Mik experienced. Like when I think back on that trip, I felt like it hit me like a microdose. Maybe I ate more than you. Maybe my metabolism is slower than yours and I was still processing dinner, but it was just kind of like, I was just kind of flowing and moving and grooving. I didn't really see much, maybe like an orb here and there. You know, at one point, I think I caught somebody's aura and it was like purple and I was like, okay. And I was just kind of chilling, relaxing. I had a very weird conversation with someone at the retreat who I felt like was putting some stuff onto me that wasn't really mine. And I ended up walking away from that conversation feeling very exposed, very vulnerable, very uncomfortable. And I went into our room with Mik and I just like wept, like ugly, ugly cry. And yeah, that was my first experience with mushrooms. And I was like, this shit sucks. And then the next time I did mushrooms, I did it again. I just like all these feelings came up and I ended up just like boohoo crying. Now, looking back on it at the time, I was juggling a lot. I was in a job that I hated. I had 2 kids now. I was like juggling that. This was like my first time away from both kids. Mm-hmm. And our youngest was like almost a year old. And just feeling a lot of emotions that I've since somewhat processed. I think it'll be like a work in progress for the rest of my life of just like re-examining who I am inside and out. And I think that uncomfortable conversation was necessary as a part of my journey because looking back, I would have never sat there for that conversation. I would have never sat down for that conversation because I have a very strong sense of self now that doesn't need external validation and doesn't need external evaluation, if that makes sense. Like I don't need anybody to tell me about myself. Not necessarily. I'm willing to hear, you know, feedback, constructive criticism, Nicholas, if you have anything you want to say.
We good.
You know, I think for a very long time, I think that was the first time that I started recognizing a pattern of very strong women feeling like they needed to big sister me and me being very like accepting of that energy and almost leaning on it so I didn't have to big sister myself. And so it's no beef with that person at all, but it was a very necessary part. So since then, I have had very like euphoric experiences where I felt like I have traveled to like other dimensions and, you know, seen things. And it's been really cool to experience those experiences. And I always get to experience them with my boo. And so we really kind of play off each other and hold each other down when we're in that state. So mushrooms will bring out what you need bringing out. And I think that's why from the very beginning, I was against recreational mushroom use because I cried so much the first 2 times. I was like, I'd bring the whole party down. So.
Definitely, guys. So if you want to know more about psychedelic mushrooms, y'all know I always got a book for y'all. There's a dope book. Shout out to my homies, Autumn and BJ, who put me on this book. It's called Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion by Michelle Janakian. Not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but it's a great book, not that long. It breaks down all you need to know about the science of mushrooms and how to have a safe trip. I also highly recommend checking out Fantastic Fungi on Netflix. It's a really interesting documentary about mushrooms, how they work, how they communicate, and their powerful benefits.
Paul Stamets is an expert mycologist. That's like a mushroom scientist. He's in that documentary, Fantastic Fungi. And I'm low-key, high-key obsessed with him. I think I'm probably going to start reading his book soon. He stumbled upon psychedelic mushrooms like in his 20s and just never looked back. He is pretty much self-taught in mushrooms. Like, he did not go to school for this. He was just in the wilderness, like figuring shit out on his own. So that's amazing. Another good docuseries if you want to know more about psychedelics in general and even a little bit about Hape, which we talked about with Kira in episode 78. Mm-hmm. Check out How to Change Your Mind. That's also on Netflix. There's a book by the same name. It's the author who's in the docuseries. Episode 2 is all about psilocybin, and Paul Stamets pops up in that series as well.
Well, all right, guys. Hopefully that gives you all of the ammunition that you need to go out and experience your first trip if you haven't already, or be a little bit more mindful in the trips that you are having.
Don't fall. Before we go, we do want to remind you to check out our Patreon if you haven't already. A couple of episodes ago, we had Cara Lovick on talking about South American indigenous practices. Mik had his reading with the Caro, and he talked about that in a special bonus episode already. I just had mine, and woo child. Yeah, so we've added that little mini episode as well, so check it out.
And finally, guys, if you're loving the show, please subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Namaste.